The sound of divorce papers hitting my kitchen table was louder than I expected. Not physically loud, but the kind of sound that echoes in your chest and makes your heart skip, beats you didn't know you needed. 3 months ago, I thought my husband Elliot was just another boring IT guy who couldn't handle a strong woman. Now I'm staring at legal documents that prove he was quietly building a case against me while I was busy laughing about what a pushover he was. How did a simple laugh at my husband's emotional distance end with my entire family taking sides against me? What happens when the person you think will always forgive you finally decides to fight back using only cold, hard facts? Honestly, Jill, sometimes I think I married a robot, I said into my phone, stirring pasta sauce with one hand while balancing the receiver against my shoulder. My sister's laugh crackled through the speaker, encouraging me to continue my evening entertainment. He just sits there every night, clicking away on his laptop like some kind of machine. No emotion, no passion, nothing. I glanced toward the living room where Elliot was indeed on his computer, probably fixing someone's network issues or updating security protocols or whatever it was he did that paid our bills. That sounds miserable, Mor, Jill sympathized. You're 33, not 93. You deserve someone who actually notices you're alive. The validation felt warm in my chest. Exactly. Like Jonas at work actually listens when I talk. He asks about my day, remembers things I've told him. It's such a difference from Mr. Robot Heart in there. Elliot's typing stopped for a moment, then resumed. I lowered my voice slightly. I swear, sometimes I think Elliot would rather troubleshoot a server crash than have an actual conversation with his wife. At least Jonas treats me like a human being. Jonas sounds sweet, Jill said. Maybe you should spend more time with people who appreciate you. Our 7-year-old daughter Tess wandered into the kitchen, her face scrunched with the particular expression she wore when trying to process adult conversations she wasn't supposed to understand. Mummy, why are you talking about Daddy like that? She asked quietly. I covered the phone's mouthpiece. Grown-up talk, sweetie. Why don't you go wash your hands for dinner? She lingered for a moment, then trudged toward the bathroom. I uncovered the phone. Kids hear everything, I muttered to Jill. Maybe they need to hear some things, she replied. Tess should know her mum deserves better than being ignored. After hanging up, I felt justified in my complaints. Elliot really was emotionally distant. He came home, worked on his computer, ate dinner with minimal conversation, and went to bed. Where was the romance? Where was the attention I deserved? My phone buzzed with a text from Jonas. Miss you already. Same time tomorrow? I smiled, typing back quickly. Wouldn't miss it. Who's texting this late? Elliot's voice came from directly behind me. I spun around, heart jumping. Just Jill. She's having drama with her boyfriend again. Elliot nodded slowly, his grey eyes studying my face in that analytical way that always made me feel like he was debugging a problem. Dinner smells good. It'll be ready in 10 minutes, I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. He stood there for another moment, then returned to the living room. I hadn't noticed him get up from his computer. How long had he been standing in the hallway? The next afternoon, I met Jonas at our usual coffee shop 3 blocks from my office. He was already waiting at our corner table, his sandy hair perfectly tousled and his smile warm in a way that made me remember what it felt like to be wanted. Rough morning? He asked as I slid into the seat across from him. The usual. Elliot was asking questions about why I've been working late so much lately. I stirred sugar into my latte, enjoying the simple pleasure of someone who actually cared about my problems. What did you tell him? That my boss has been dumping extra projects on me, which isn't technically a lie. I am staying late, just not at the office. I grinned at Jonas, who chuckled and reached across to squeeze my hand. You shouldn't have to sneak around to spend time with someone who appreciates you, he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. You deserve better than walking on eggshells in your own home. The validation was intoxicating. Jonas understood that I was trapped in a marriage with someone who treated me more like a roommate than a wife. He saw how lonely I was, how starved for genuine connection. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if things were different, I admitted. Different how? If I was with someone who actually wanted to be with me, someone who didn't make me feel invisible. Jonas leaned forward. You're not invisible to me, Morwenna. You're the most interesting person I know. We talked for another hour about everything and nothing, his freelance graphic design projects, my frustrations at work, books we'd read, places we wanted to travel. Real conversation, the kind I couldn't remember having with Elliot in years. When I finally got home at 8:30, Elliot was helping Tess with homework at the kitchen table. Sorry I'm so late, I said, hanging my coat on the back of a chair. My boss is really piling on the pressure with this new client project. That's the third time this week, Elliot said, without looking up from Tess's math worksheet. Maybe you should talk to HR about workload distribution. The suggestion annoyed me. He was always trying to fix things instead of just listening and being supportive. It's not that simple, Elliot. Some of us don't have the luxury of leaving work at 5 o'clock every day. He looked up then, his expression unreadable. I wasn't criticizing. I was trying to help. Well, maybe instead of trying to solve everything, you could just acknowledge that I'm working hard to contribute to this family. Tess glanced between us nervously. Are you guys fighting? No, sweetheart, I said quickly. Mummy's just tired from working so much. Later that evening, my mother called to check in. I found myself telling her about the extra hours I'd been putting in at the office. You're such a dedicated worker, Morwenna, she said approvingly. Elliot is lucky to have a wife who takes her responsibilities so seriously. The praise felt good, even though it was based on a lie. But was it really a lie? I was working hard, just not in the way she thought. After hanging up, I noticed Elliot at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out in front of him. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. What's all this? I asked. Just reviewing our monthly expenses, he said. Making sure everything adds up. Something in his tone made my stomach flutter with anxiety. Find anything interesting? A few charges I don't recognize. Coffee shops, ride shares. Probably nothing important. He gathered the papers into a neat pile, but not before I caught a glimpse of highlighted entries. My coffee dates with Jonas, the Uber rides to his apartment building. I'm sure there's an explanation for everything, I said carefully. I'm sure there is, Elliot replied, his voice perfectly neutral. Sunday dinner at Elliot's parents' house was usually a tedious affair, but this week I was actually looking forward to it. My sister Jill was joining us, which meant I'd have an ally in the room full of Elliot's family members who had never quite warmed to me. Barbara Pierce answered the door with her usual polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. At 61, she maintained the kind of rigid posture that suggested she'd been judging people's moral character since birth. Morwenna, dear, you look tired. Work has been incredibly demanding lately, I replied, stepping into the familiar living room where Derek Pierce was setting up extra chairs around the dining table. Elliot's father had always been kinder to me than his wife, but even he seemed subdued today, offering only a brief nod of acknowledgement. Jill arrived 20 minutes later, bringing her usual energy and a bottle of wine that Barbara accepted with barely concealed disapproval. My sister had never been the Pierce family's favorite person, too loud, too opinionated, too willing to call out their passive-aggressive comments. Morwenna's been working herself to death, Jill announced as we gathered around the dinner table. Her boss has her staying late almost every night. That seems excessive, Barbara said, passing the mashed potatoes. Surely there are labor laws about reasonable working hours. Some jobs require more dedication than others, I replied, accepting the validation from Jill's supportive nod. Speaking of late nights, Barbara continued, Tess mentioned you've missed several bedtime stories this week. The comment stung because it was true, but I wasn't about to admit that in front of Elliot's mother. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the family's financial well-being. Elliot had been unusually quiet throughout dinner, cutting his roast beef into precise squares and eating methodically. Finally, he looked up. "The bank statements show some interesting patterns in your spending," he said conversationally. My heart skipped. "What kind of patterns?" "Coffee purchases during work hours, mostly. Transportation charges to parts of town, nowhere near your office." The table fell silent except for the sound of Derek clearing his throat uncomfortably. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced a laugh. "Are you seriously monitoring my coffee purchases now?" "What am I? A teenager with a credit card?" "I'm not monitoring anything," Elliot said calmly. "I'm reviewing our household budget, which is something responsible adults do." Jill jumped to my defense. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, More. You work your ass off and then get interrogated like a criminal for buying coffee." "Language, please," Barbara muttered. "Sorry, but this is ridiculous," Jill continued. "Elliot, you should be thanking your wife for her dedication, not playing detective with bank statements." I felt emboldened by my sister's support. "Exactly. Maybe if you showed a little appreciation instead of suspicion, I wouldn't feel like I'm living with a security camera." Elliot set down his fork and looked directly at me. "I appreciate everything you do for our family. I just want to understand why your work schedule has changed so dramatically." "Because that's what happens when you're valued at your job," I said, the lie flowing easily now. "Some of us get additional responsibilities because our bosses trust us." My phone buzzed with a text. Without thinking, I glanced at it under the table. "Jonas. Did he buy it?" I couldn't help smiling at the message, which felt like having a secret ally in enemy territory. "Something funny?" Elliot asked. "Just Jill being Jill," I said, even though my sister was sitting right next to me and clearly hadn't sent any messages. Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't pursue it. Instead, he stood up abruptly. "Thank you for dinner, Mum. I need some air." He left through the back door, leaving the rest of us sitting in uncomfortable silence. "Well," Barbara said finally, "that was unpleasant." "Maybe if you supported your daughter-in-law instead of enabling his controlling behavior," Jill snapped. "Controlling?" Derek spoke up for the first time. The boy was asking reasonable questions about household finances. "Reasonable questions?" I laughed bitterly. "He's treating me like a suspect in my own marriage." Tess, who had been quietly coloring at the kids' table, looked up with worried eyes. "Can we go home now?" The drive back to our apartment was silent except for Tess's questions about why Daddy had left dinner early and why everyone seemed angry. I gave her vague reassurances while texting Jonas that everything was fine. But as I tucked Tess into bed that night, I couldn't shake the image of Elliot's face when he'd asked about the bank statements. He hadn't looked angry or suspicious. He'd looked sad. Over the next 2 weeks, Elliot became even more distant than usual. He left for work earlier, came home later, and spent most evenings either on his computer or helping Tess with homework. Our conversations became purely functional. Who was picking up groceries, when the car needed an oil change, whether Tess needed new school clothes. The silence should have been a relief, but instead it made me feel more justified in seeking companionship elsewhere. "He's completely checked out," I told Jonas during one of our afternoon coffee dates. "It's like living with a ghost who pays the bills." "Maybe he's giving you space to figure out what you really want," Jonas suggested, his hand covering mine across the small table. "Or maybe he's planning his exit strategy. Jill thinks he might be seeing someone else." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "What makes her think that?" "The late nights, the emotional distance, the sudden interest in our finances. Classic signs of a guilty conscience." It was easier to believe Elliot was cheating than to examine my own behavior too closely. If he was having an affair, then my relationship with Jonas was just evening the playing field. That afternoon, I called my mother to vent about Elliot's increasingly cold behavior. "He barely speaks to me anymore, Mom. I think he's looking for an excuse to leave." "Oh, honey," she said sympathetically, "have you tried talking to him directly about what's wrong?" "I've tried everything. He just shuts down. Honestly, I'm starting to think he never really loved me. Maybe he just wanted a wife and mother for Tess, and now he's bored. That doesn't sound like the Elliot I know, my mother said carefully. People change, Mom. Sometimes they show you who they really are when the novelty wears off. Later that evening, Elliot approached me while I was folding laundry in our bedroom. I found some text messages on our phone bill that I'd like to discuss, he said quietly. My heart hammered, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of messages? Frequent communication with a number I don't recognize. Jonas Field. The fact that he'd looked up the number shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Jonas is a colleague. We work together on projects. The messages are being sent at all hours. Evenings, weekends, early mornings. We collaborate on deadlines. Sometimes that means working outside normal business hours. Elliot studied my face with that analytical expression I'd grown to hate. Can I see your phone? Absolutely not. The response came out sharper than I'd intended. I'm not going to let you invade my privacy because you're feeling insecure. I'm not feeling insecure, Morwenna. I'm feeling concerned. About what? About my wife's behavior over the past 2 months. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the defensive responses to simple questions. I stood up from the bed, crossing my arms. So now I'm on trial for having a life outside this apartment, for having friends and colleagues who actually treat me like a human being. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? You can't stand that someone at work appreciates my contributions and treats me with respect. You're jealous that I have meaningful relationships with people who don't take me for granted. Elliot was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I need to understand what's happening in my marriage. What's happening is that your wife is tired of being treated like furniture. What's happening is that I'm remembering what it feels like to be valued as a person. By Jonas. By someone who actually listens when I talk. Elliot nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. I think I need to speak with a lawyer. The words hit me like cold water. A lawyer? About what? Just to understand my options. I laughed, the sound coming out harsh and bitter. Your options? Elliot, you're being paranoid and dramatic. I'm not doing anything wrong. Then you won't mind if I verify that. Go ahead, I said, calling his bluff. Waste money on a lawyer because your wife has work friends. I'm sure they'll be very impressed with your evidence. After he left the room, I immediately called Jill. He's threatening to involve lawyers, I told her. Over what? Having coffee with a colleague? Apparently, I'm not allowed to have male friends without being accused of something. This is emotional abuse, Moore. He's trying to isolate you and control your social interactions. That's what I thought. He'd never actually follow through anyway. He's too passive to take real action. But even as I said it, something in Elliot's demeanor had been different. There was a quiet determination in his voice that I'd never heard before. 3 days later, I came home to find Elliot packing a small suitcase. Where are you going? I'm staying at my parents' house for a few days. I think we both need space to think about what we want from this marriage. You're abandoning your family because I won't let you control my friendships. I'm removing myself from a situation that's become untenable. What about Tess? I'll pick her up from school tomorrow and take her to dinner. We can work out a schedule. The casualness of his tone infuriated me. A schedule? You're treating our daughter like a business meeting. I'm trying to minimize the disruption to her routine while we figure out how to move forward. There's nothing to figure out, Elliot. You're creating problems that don't exist. He zipped the suitcase and looked at me directly. I hope you're right. After he left, the apartment felt both empty and liberated. I could text Jonas without worrying about Elliot's suspicious glances. I could stay out late without facing interrogation. I could live my life without constant judgment. But when Tess asked why Daddy wasn't coming home for dinner, I struggled to find an explanation that didn't make me sound like the villain. Elliot had been staying at his parents' house for a week when he showed up at our apartment on Saturday morning. I was having coffee and scrolling through my phone, enjoying the peaceful start to my weekend. We need to talk, he said, settling into the chair across from me at our small kitchen table. About what? About where you were Thursday night. My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. Thursday night, I'd been at Jonas's apartment, finally taking our relationship to the level it had been building toward for months. We'd talked about my marriage, about how lonely I'd been, about what it meant to find real connection with someone. I was working late. Again. Your office building has security cameras in the parking garage, Elliot said quietly. Your car wasn't there after 6 p.m. The methodical way he delivered this information chilled me. This wasn't the passive, withdrawn husband I'd grown used to dismissing. This was someone who had been quietly gathering evidence. I went to dinner after work. With colleagues. Which colleagues? I don't have to provide you with a detailed itinerary of my social life, Elliot. Actually, you do. We're married. We have a child together. I have a right to know where my wife spends her evenings. I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. Your wife? When did you start thinking of me as your wife instead of just another household appliance that occasionally needs maintenance? I've always thought of you as my wife. Really? Because for the past 2 years, you've treated me like I'm invisible. You come home, eat dinner, work on your computer, and go to bed. When's the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When's the last time you gave me an honest answer? The question caught me off guard. I stood up and walked to the sink, needing distance from his steady gaze. I'm honest with you. Are you? Because I called your office yesterday. Your supervisor said you haven't worked late in over a month. My heart hammered against my ribs. She's mistaken. I also spoke with Jonas Field. The world seemed to tilt sideways. You what? I looked him up online. Freelance graphic designer. Works from a studio apartment on 5th Street. I called him yesterday afternoon. You had no right. He was very surprised to hear from your husband. Apparently, you've told him quite a bit about our marriage problems. I turned to face him, anger replacing fear. You're stalking my friends now. This is exactly why I need space from you, Elliot. You're suffocating me. I'm trying to save my marriage. By violating my privacy and harassing my colleagues. By finding out the truth. I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to Jonas, not caring that Elliot could see me doing it. You want the truth? The truth is that Jonas treats me like a human being. He listens when I talk. He makes me feel valued and appreciated. He reminds me what it's like to be with someone who actually wants to spend time with me. Are you having an affair? The direct question hung in the air between us. I could have denied it. I could have claimed that Jonas was just a friend, that Elliot was misinterpreting innocent interactions. Instead, I laughed. An affair? That's what you call it when your wife finally finds someone who appreciates her? Elliot's face went very still. Answer the question. I call it remembering what it feels like to be alive. I call it discovering that not all men treat their partners like inconvenient roommates. Are you sleeping with him? I'm connecting with someone who sees me as more than a domestic service provider. That's not an answer. I looked him directly in the eyes. Yes, Elliot. I'm sleeping with Jonas. I'm having long conversations with someone who finds me interesting. I'm experiencing what it's like to be desired by someone who doesn't take me for granted. The silence that followed was deafening. Elliot didn't yell or throw anything or storm out. He just sat there, absorbing the information like he was processing data. How long? He asked finally. Does it matter? It matters for the divorce proceedings. The casual way he said it made my stomach drop. Divorce proceedings? I've been meeting with a lawyer for the past week, just in case. You're serious about this? You're having an affair, Morwenna. You just admitted it to my face. I'm having a relationship with someone who actually cares about me. If that threatens you, maybe you should examine why your wife needed to find emotional support elsewhere. Elliot stood up slowly. I'll be back tomorrow to get more of my things. I think it's best if you're not here when I come. You're pathetic, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. You're so weak that instead of fighting for your marriage, you're running to lawyers and your mommy." Something shifted in his expression. "I am fighting for my marriage. I've been fighting for it for months while you've been lying to my face and sleeping with another man." "Fighting? You call ignoring me and treating me like a stranger fighting?" "I call gathering evidence fighting. I call documenting your lies and infidelity fighting. I call protecting my daughter's interests fighting." The mention of Tess made my chest tighten. "Don't you dare use our daughter as a weapon." "I'm not using her as anything. I'm making sure she's protected when this marriage falls apart." He walked toward the door, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped trusting you." After he left, I called Jill immediately. "He knows about Jonas," I said without preamble. "How?" "He's been investigating. Phone records, security cameras. He even called Jonas directly." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I'm tired of being treated like I don't exist." "Good for you. It's about time someone stood up to his controlling bullshit." "He's talking about divorce." "Let him talk. He's just trying to scare you into submission. Elliot would never actually file for divorce. He's too passive and he needs you too much." "I don't know, Jill. He seemed different today, more determined. Trust me more. He's bluffing. Men like Elliot don't take action. They just threaten and sulk until they get their way." That night, I barely slept. Every small sound in the apartment made me think Elliot was coming back, but he didn't. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but ominous. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone at the front door, but instead of Elliot's key in the lock, I heard an unfamiliar knock. I opened the door to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Morwenna Pierce?" "Yes." "I need you to sign for this." My hands shook as I signed the electronic pad. The return address was from a law office I'd never heard of. Inside the envelope were divorce papers, real ones. The law office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the intimidating mahogany and leather I'd seen in movies, it was modern and sterile, with glass conference tables and abstract art that probably cost more than my car. Elliot was already seated when I arrived, flanked by a woman in her 50s, wearing a navy suit that screamed competence. His parents sat behind him like a silent jury. "Mrs. Pierce," the lawyer said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Margaret Chen, Mr. Pierce's attorney. Please, have a seat." I'd brought Jill for moral support, but seeing Elliot's family lined up against me made me wish I'd hired my own lawyer, instead of assuming this was all an elaborate bluff. "Before we begin," I said, settling into the chair across from them, "I want to make it clear that I think this is a massive overreaction to normal marital problems." Margaret opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "Mr. Pierce has asked me to present evidence of adultery and financial misconduct that occurred during your marriage." "Financial misconduct?" I laughed nervously. "I bought coffee and took a few Uber rides. That's hardly embezzlement." "Let's start with the timeline," Margaret said, pulling out a calendar marked with red X's. "According to your work supervisor, you haven't worked late since February 15th. However, bank records show regular charges at Cafe Luna and ride-sharing services to the 5th Street area throughout March and April." She slid a stack of bank statements across the table. Every coffee date with Jonas was highlighted in yellow. Every Uber ride to his apartment was circled in red. "Your phone records show daily communication with Jonas Field beginning February 20th, she continued, adding phone bills to the growing pile of evidence. Text messages, phone calls, often lasting over an hour. "Having friends isn't illegal," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Margaret pulled out a manila folder. "These are printouts of text messages recovered from your shared phone plan." My stomach dropped as I recognized my own words on the pages. "Can't wait to see you tonight. E is working late again. You make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I wish I could wake up next to you every morning." "These messages clearly indicate a romantic and sexual relationship outside your marriage," Margaret said matter-of-factly. Jill squeezed my hand under the table. This is a violation of privacy. You can't just spy on someone and use it against them. Phone records from a shared family plan are not private, Margaret replied. They're joint marital assets, accessible to both parties. She pulled out another folder. We also have photographic evidence. The photos were grainy but unmistakable. Me leaving Jonas's apartment building. Me and Jonas holding hands at the coffee shop. Me kissing him goodbye on the sidewalk outside his studio. How did you get these? I demanded. Elliot spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. Dash cam footage from my car. I started recording my routes when I noticed charges from that part of town. You were stalking me. I was documenting my wife's activities when she repeatedly lied about her whereabouts. Margaret spread out more documents. Credit card statements show purchases at Victoria's Secret, a boutique hotel downtown, and a jewelry store, all on dates when you claimed to be working late. I stared at the evidence of my affair laid out like a crime scene investigation. Every secret moment with Jonas, every lie I told Elliot, every time I'd felt justified in seeking happiness elsewhere. It was all there in black and white. This is harassment, Jill said. Elliot is obviously obsessed with controlling Morwenna's every move. Mr. Pierce is protecting his interests in anticipation of divorce proceedings, Margaret replied calmly. Which brings us to the custody arrangement. She pulled out another document. Given the evidence of adultery and deception, Mr. Pierce is seeking primary physical custody of your daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't take Tess away from me. We're not taking her away, Elliot said quietly. We're requesting a custody arrangement that prioritizes her stability and well-being. Margaret continued. The evidence shows a pattern of deception and prioritizing an extramarital relationship over family responsibilities. Tess's school records indicate she was late to class 7 times in the past month, always on mornings following your evening absences. I was working. You were with Jonas Field, Margaret interrupted, and as a result, your daughter's routine was disrupted. She pulled out the final folder. These are statements from family members and friends regarding the deterioration of your marriage and its impact on Tess. I recognized Barbara Pierce's neat handwriting on the first page, but there were others too. Derek's statement about my behavior at family dinners. Even my own mother had provided a statement expressing concern about my recent changes in behavior and priorities. My mother wouldn't. Mrs. Marsh was contacted after you told her that Elliot was likely having an affair, Margaret said. She felt obligated to provide accurate information about the situation. The betrayal was complete. Even my own family had turned against me. This is what you want? I asked Elliot directly. To destroy our family over a mistake. You destroyed our family when you chose to have an affair instead of working on our marriage. I tried to work on our marriage. You were never available, never interested, never what? Never suspicious enough, never controlling enough to prevent you from cheating. Margaret cleared her throat. The proposed settlement includes joint legal custody with primary physical custody to Mr. Pierce. You would have supervised visitation initially, transitioning to overnight visits after 6 months of counseling. Supervised visitation, like I'm a danger to my own daughter. Like you're someone who has demonstrated poor judgment and a willingness to prioritize personal desires over family stability, Elliot said. The room fell silent except for the sound of air conditioning and my own rapid breathing. All those months of feeling justified in my relationship with Jonas, all those conversations with Jill about how I deserved better, all those moments of feeling superior to my boring, predictable husband, they crumbled in the face of legal documents and photographic evidence. I want to see Tess, I said finally. That can be arranged, Margaret replied, under the supervision guidelines outlined in the custody proposal. This is insane. I'm her mother. You're a mother who chose to have an affair instead of addressing problems in her marriage through honest communication or counseling, Elliot said. You're a mother who lied repeatedly to her husband and daughter about where she was spending her time. I made mistakes, but that doesn't make me a bad mother. No, he agreed, but it makes you someone who needs to prove she's willing to put Tess's needs first. Margaret gathered the documents back into their folders. You have 30 days to respond to the divorce petition. I strongly recommend you retain your own counsel. As everyone stood to leave, Elliot looked at me one final time. I gave you every opportunity to tell me the truth. I asked direct questions and gave you chances to explain what was happening. You chose to lie and mock me instead. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now we have to deal with the consequences. Barbara Pierce paused beside my chair. I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for, dear. It cost you everything else. After they left, Jill and I sat in the empty conference room, staring at the polished table where my marriage had officially ended. He's more ruthless than I thought, she admitted quietly. He's not ruthless, I said, finally understanding. He's just done. 3 months later, I signed the divorce papers in the same conference room. Elliot got primary custody, the apartment, and most of our shared assets. I got supervised visits with Tess and a hard lesson in the difference between feeling justified and being right. Jonas had stopped returning my calls 2 weeks after the legal proceedings began. Apparently, being someone's escape from reality was more appealing than dealing with the messy aftermath of destroyed families. I see Tess every other weekend now, under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor who takes notes about our interactions. She asks why Daddy cries sometimes, and why we can't all live together anymore, and when things will go back to normal. I tell her that sometimes grown-ups make choices that can't be undone, and that Daddy and I both love her very much, and that this is our normal now. What I don't tell her is that I spent months laughing at her father's pain, dismissing his concerns, and mocking his attempts to save our marriage. I don't tell her that I chose temporary validation over permanent commitment, or that I confused being heard with being loved. I don't tell her that the man I thought was too weak to fight back was actually strong enough to walk away.